certainly 40, 50 years ago, people with epilepsy were largely desexualized.
Sex when you have epilepsy? Well, that is what consultant neurologist Charlotte Lawthom and I are going to be talking about in today's recording. We're talking about people of all genders and sexes, people who, in addition to having epilepsy, may have intellectual disability or autism, people with controlled seizures, and people with refractory epilepsy. I even talk a little bit about my own experience having a seizure during sex. Sexual dysfunction is really common in humans in general, but very common in people with epilepsy for a multitude of reasons, which Charlotte and I are going to be talking about. So if you're interested in learning more about this topic, do stay tuned and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks for joining us, Charlotte. It's so lovely to meet you like this rather than just chatting on Twitter. Please tell everybody about yourself.
Thanks very much for having me. I am a consultant neurologist in Newport. I spend about 60% of my time in epilepsy, and I've got interest in intellectual disability and epilepsy, and I'm kind of obsessed with drugs and pharmacogenomics. We've got a big project in our centre where we routinely collect mood scores, so we're really invested in recognising and treating mood disorder.
Brilliant.
And today, I'm really happy because we're going to be talking about the taboo subject that is sex.
That's outrageous. Who talks about that?
There's not enough people talk about it because clearly there are many, many people out there who are desperate to speak to somebody about their sexual concerns, worries and issues.
Exactly. And, you know, it's something that's still going on. I believe the population is still increasing. So it's something that really needs to be spoken of, well, amongst us as a population anyway. But I think specifically amongst people affected by epilepsy, it's sometimes even more of a taboo. And I suppose, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there tends to be, I'm not sure I like this title for it, but sexual dysfunction amongst us for a number of different reasons. Could you elaborate on that, please?
What's interesting is that there's some sort of sociological data to suggest that sexual dysfunction is rising as a marker in the world. And although, as you mentioned, the population is still going on, in fact, the birth rate and the successful pregnancy rate in women is actually dropping fairly precipitously in developed nations. And so there are lots of things about that. So it suggests there's something about the way we live our lives that may mean sex has become more of a problem than it ever has before. And I think that certainly 40, 50 years ago, people with epilepsy were largely desexualized. So I've heard lots of women say to me, I was told that I must never have children. And of course, the easiest way to do that is to just not have sex.
Yeah, but the thing is, we are animals, and most of us, unless we're asexual, you know, fancy a bit of sex upon occasion.
Yeah.
So what's holding us back?
So what's interesting is that we talk a lot, don't we, about being health proactive. We tell people to 7 to 10 greens, to exercise, and we don't actually talk about sex. And in fact, there is quite a lot of data to show that sex is really good for mood. Sex with a consistent partner is very good for immunity. Sorry, that's my dog. And
I just wonder what that was.
So Charlotte suddenly morphed into a four-legged animal. And of course, sex has lots of health benefits. And so, quite aside from any health benefits, anything that is good for mood has got to be a good thing. And we know that rates of depression and anxiety are much higher in people with epilepsy, and they're much higher in people with active epilepsy. And I'm really embarrassed to say that we still haven't published our data that we've been collecting, but in our active epilepsy group, in our cohort, we've got rates of mood disorder of about 79% in people with active epilepsy. So that you've then got the issue of if people aren't having sex is a potential mood enhancer. And you've also got the issue that lots of the medications that we use for mood are not good in terms of driving down a libido, and also, and this can be very frustrating, delaying orgasm, both orgasm for a female and a traditional ejaculation for a man. So there's lots of things about sexuality and sexual behaviour that are concerning, I think.
Okay, what stops people from speaking to their neurologist or the GP about this? I mean, first of all, I think, to be honest, especially if I have refractory epilepsy, it's not top of my list. It's not priority if your life's a bit pants anyway because you have uncontrolled seizures. That's a generalization.
Yes.
But as you're saying, healthy sex can play a huge part, a positive part in somebody's life. So what else do you think stops people from bringing this up with their doc or their nurse?
So I think it'd be interesting because I suspect if we ask epilepsy nurses, they'll get a higher rate of being asked about it.
I do wonder.
And
yeah.
I think the general neurologist, by general neurologist, I mean the neurologist or the epileptologist is likely to have a much lower rate of people speaking to them. And I think that's probably because there are time constraints on appointments. And I think people think, well, if I talk to this person about my sex life, will they then take my other concerns seriously? So they probably fear that maybe sex is something that is lower down on the list, as you just intimated. You know, if you've got terrible seizures, your sex life might not be that important. But having said that, if you're living with 30 seizures a month and hasn't got better in 10 years, why shouldn't you have sex as well? You know, that's another issue.
Totally. I totally agree. And also because of how linked it is to mental health and how you've mentioned it can help basically make you feel more positive, at least temporarily. It's something to take into account when looking after yourself as a whole, right?
And I find interestingly that we're quite good at talking about contraception with women. We don't talk about it at all with men. I've had a number of men say to me, my partner and I are trying to get pregnant. Do you think that the drug I'm on is affecting my sperm quality? And that, of course, is something that we don't talk about. And we know that it is true for sodium valproate. And yet, despite all the attention on prevent, actually, we are focused entirely on teratogenicity in the female. And one of the things that has led to sexual conversations with women has been because they're taking sodium valproate. And so I've had to start a conversation about risks of getting pregnant, and they say to me, I'm not having sex, and I'm not having sex because it's uncomfortable, it's painful, I feel worried, or I had a seizure once during sex and I can never go there again.
Well, just so everyone knows, I have had a seizure during sex. Luckily, it was a few years ago. And if you ask me, how was it? I'd say, I don't know, because lucky in a way that I don't remember much of it. I imagine the other person may, but I don't feel at all ashamed for it. Why would I? And I never have done. But also, I've been very, very, very open about my epilepsy with everybody that I've ever been worked with, all that type of thing as well. So there was nothing to surprise anybody. Not that it was, expected, shall we say. But and I think we need to be, as people with epilepsy, we shouldn't be ashamed of saying it's happened, because I've met loads of people who've told me it's happened. I'm sure you have, right, Charlotte?
Yes. I mean, it's fascinating because I think the worst situation for it to happen in is if someone is having sex with somebody who doesn't know that they have seizures.
Right. That would be so awful.
And then they have a seizure and then they feel outed in a way. I tried to hide this and it's appeared, and that's awful. And I think, if only people were more open about their epilepsy, we wouldn't be in such a difficult position. So someone said to me, who are you doing a podcast with? And I said, actually, she's perhaps best described as an epilepsy influencer and ambassador. Because there aren't enough people who are prepared to say, look at me, I'm a successful human being and I'm living with epilepsy.
Yeah, well, you're very, very kind using those terms. I'm so stereotypical English. I'm like, I can't take that compliments. But
now you must remember, this is for everybody. A compliment is like a box of chocolates. It's a gift. so you have to receive it
with no
graciously.
calories. It's great.
That's right, calorie free. One of the things that for anybody who is worried about that or who's had that before, the key thing is try not to have sex with somebody that you don't feel safe with in that scenario. So, and that's, that's not a moral thing at all. It's just that unfortunately, if there is a possibility of an additional complex thing happening in sex, that could be tricky. So you need to think, if I had a seizure, would this person know what to do and how would they respond? And that probably means basic things about first aid. And also, what's really important is that they recognise a seizure and that they stop.
Right.
Because I'm really interested with this idea of consent. And if somebody has reduced or impaired awareness, by definition, they are no longer consenting to the sexual activity.
Totally. And also, if they don't know that you're having a seizure, I mean, funny, they could think something else is going on. And keep going, and it would be very confusing for them, especially if you go from focal to bilateral tonic-clonic, or and that could be really quite traumatizing for the person, I think. So this is just personal, but out of respect for myself and for the other person, I would tell them. I think it might be quite, or I wonder if it would be quite a challenge for people who otherwise do have controlled seizures. So I know someone who hasn't had a seizure in 20 years. Well, won't tell them. But are they? Because you might be tired, darlings, and it might be late, and you might be excited, and that's a bit of an invitation. I don't know, for many of us anyway, for a seizure.
So particularly, if you're in the, if you're having frequent sleep deprivation and excitement and trauma and perhaps alcohol, and maybe you've not taken your medication on time, lots and lots of issues there.
Yes. So women will talk about sexual dysfunction more than men on average, I suggest. I wonder sometimes, could it be more obvious sometimes if a man has sexual dysfunction, given the workings of genitalia? And if so, then what would you recommend for men? Or people who identify as male, should I say, when they have sexual dysfunction and epilepsy?
So it's really interesting, because I would say that neurologists are more likely to inquire about erectile dysfunction than anything else. They won't necessarily ask about delayed ejaculation. Although if somebody's complaining of low sex drive or difficulty, I will straight out ask the question.
I can imagine.
You can imagine, because quite often that will be linked to a medication, and sometimes it's worth trying to switch things around. I think that it's really important, and I say this to people all the time, sex is an emotive, deeply psychological thing, and so therefore it's very easy for that whole very fragile house of cards to go crashing down.
Gosh,
and I often say to people, once you've had a problem with erectile dysfunction, it can be a self-fulfilling circle. It's like a positive feedback loop. I end up doing quite a lot of testosterone testing in men. And now that I've said that out loud, I am aware that probably I am guilty of being genderist myself there, because there is data to suggest that women with low testosterone report of low libido and poorer orgasm reaching. But to my shame, I'm usually testing it in men, and about a third of the time it is low. And I've got quite a lot of men who are on testosterone replacement. Now, of those, some of those have been on sodium valproate, which we know has metabolic problems. A couple have been on carbamazepine. So I do think that when we're thinking about drugs and metabolic syndromes and weight gain and diabetes, we probably need to think about endocrine dysfunction as a whole, including genitalia.
I wish in the past my neurologist had brought this up. Not just do you want children, because let's think about the drugs for that reason, but have you got some nice little feelings going on, and how do things stand there?
Is it all working?
Yeah. And what is working to different people? Well, it's different, I think, isn't it? a bit like, we'll have people who are asexual, and people who are asexual, how would they fit in here?
Well, that's really interesting. And I guess the question is, it's perfectly okay to be asexual by choice. It's not okay to feel that you've been pushed into that Venn diagram just for lack of any other better descriptors, I think.
So, do you mean that you've come across some people who might classify themselves as asexual because they're just not getting sex?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. They feel that they are they don't have access to sex. Not necessarily just because of epilepsy, often in a setting of other complex needs. But there are an awful lot of people out there who want to have sex, don't know how to access it, feel that society tells them that they shouldn't. And we tend to desexualize people with any form of chronic disease. It's something that we do in our society.
It's crazy, isn't it? I have a friend who has severe chronic disease, lucky to still be alive, to be honest, an amazing person. And we will talk about sex a lot because it's never out there. Like nobody would dare ask him about it either, because they think, oh, one cannot bring up anything so rude. Goodness me, Well, and I was like, hey, fellow animal, how's it going? Because at the end of the day, that's what we are, isn't it? We are apes, and most people do at some point want to get it on. Oh, do you know what I wanted to ask you as well? And because I think nobody asks about this. So what about people with intellectual disability and sexual desire? I feel that I'm no expert on this at all, but I think that, we are fellow animals, and surely many of them will have some sort of sexual desire.
I completely agree. And so I think people need to be assessed as individuals. Many people with intellectual disabilities have the capacity to decide whether they want to be sexually active, point one, and point two, who they want to be sexually active with. And quite often, if many young adults, particularly young adults, they live at home with parents who don't want to consider their children as sexual beings, and then having that sort of discussion is very difficult. So often it's framed in terms, particularly if it's a female, it's framed in terms of contraception. And then I say, well, is it possible that she could have a boyfriend or a partner and have sex? And this is sort of horrifying to some people. And I always make the case that it's a basic human right, and that it is really important that we have this conversation, and there needs to be an advocate for them. And I think where clearly some caregivers, whether they be directly related or not, are very enlightened and are of that mind. But there is a real danger of saying, it's not going to happen because I'm not going to allow it to happen, because you're going to be wrapped up in cotton wool the whole time, and therefore there will be no possibility. I'm always really delighted when young women with intellectual disability express that they do want to do things with people, and I'm further delighted then when we can move that on and say, well, let's make sure that she is on contraception, and let's talk about how that can be done safely. And in an intellectual disability setting, not just the obvious people, but people like art therapists and psychologists can be really helpful in sort of facilitating that, and that whole issue of consent and how it can be done. And I don't know if you're familiar with the T video about consent. So
I don't know if I don't think so, but tell us about it.
So it's in stages. So someone says, I'd like a cup of tea, and they say, you'd like a cup of tea? How would you like your cup of tea? I'd like my tea like this. Okay, I'm boiling the kettle. So you would still like the cup of tea? Yes. Here comes the tea. Is the tea as you wanted it? Yes, I this is the tea as I wanted it. Even once you start drinking the tea, at any time, you're free to say, I don't want the tea. I asked for the tea, but I don't.
I want this mug instead, actually, and I'd rather have an extra half teaspoon of sugar, thank you. So I'm not
That's
ready for
exactly
it.
it.
Yeah. Or I'd
So
rather
tea is
skimmed
something
milk
that
than
is,
semi-skimmed. Okay. Yeah.
yes, yeah, exactly. So at any time, it's an iterative and it's evolving thing, and because tea is something that we all do, or certainly
Yeah, just a tad.
99.9% of us, people are familiar with that as a
Yeah.
concept. So I think that we do need to destigmatize that. I'm involved in a research program with Rohit Shankar and my brother-in-law, Dan Goodley, and my sister.
Oh my God, keep it in the family. Yes.
Keep it in the family. And they are psychologists and sociologists. And we're looking at a project in intellectual disability groups with epilepsy. And there are two advocacy groups that we're going to be talking to. And that is on my list, Torie, to talk to them about is sex. How can we talk about it? What's missing? What can we do? How can we empower and facilitate people to have the freedom and the choice to have sexual relationships, which is their right.
And not be taken advantage of, so they know how to say, like you're saying with the cuppa.
One of the ways forward has got to be, we've got to invest in more co-production of research with people in these groups. So
Right.
where everybody talks about co-productive research, but actually they talk the talk, but do we walk the walk? It's easy to say and hard to do. But I think that people are starting to realise the importance of it. And I think particularly in autism, there is an emphasis on communication for food and toileting. And even things like pain are often really overlooked. The battles I've had about trying to get people to recognise pain. And pain is a big issue for somebody. And one reason why somebody might not take their medication is they're in agony with dental pain and they need a dental thing urgently. So, and then sex comes, as we've talked about it, way down on the list. But in fact, because sexual behaviour is common, it should have much more of a focus on it.
I was having a conversation with this lady in the pub, and I think I might have mentioned this on another podcast, but anyway, and she looked after or worked in a centre for people with intellectual disability, children like up to about the age of, I don't know, 18 or something. And there was one chap who wouldn't stop masturbating in front of people. He had not been taught how to help control himself or go and do, and what they did, they put him like in overalls and zipped it up. The only, and I was like, wow, I ain't no clinician, but that seems a bit, I don't know,
cruel and harsh. What they needed to do was say, to go through a process of reward him for doing it in private, saying that's fine, and then try a lot of distraction techniques when he's outside. I mean, there've got to be better ways of handling this, but the problem is the best ways of handling them are often the things that are really dependent on human beings and time.
Oh, humans. Oh.
And so, we live in a world where people and carers and caregivers are in such short supply that people tend to rely on non-people related solutions.
Well, I felt sorry for both parties. I was like, the poor chap. Oh, and then he was also doing stuff with excrement, because he wanted to get sensations, and so some people listening think, why are you talking about this? Is nothing to do with epilepsy. Wrong. This is a huge comorbidity for many people with epilepsy, but it's just never spoken about, really. I don't think, unless you're in trouble often, and that's not fair.
No.
It's not fair.
No, it's not.
I mean, what would you say to people who are just like totally, whether it be just a confidence thing, a cultural thing, whatever, who can they speak to where they really feel they won't be judged?
Okay. So I think if you don't have a good relationship with your neurologist, try your epilepsy specialist nurse. If you don't feel confident in that environment, many of the third sectors have link people that
charities.
Yeah, so Epilepsy Wales and Epilepsy Action. In Wales, there are people that will connect people, and sometimes as well, it's not ideal. But if the only way that you can access it is via a Facebook group, that'll probably give you some information and set you on the right path. I also think that we probably need to make more sexual information available. So just as we've got lots of information about drugs on websites, we don't have enough about mood, though that is improving. We have so about antidepressants and nothing about sexual function. So clearly we need to be, if we made it all available, I'll just shut the door, my dog. If we made all of that information available, then that would automatically reduce the whole taboo element of it.
Right.
And I often find that in places where an email service is available, people who are very shy might raise something in the written form that they wouldn't want to do in person. And that should be perfectly acceptable.
That could be really good for people who actually, I think, tend to go to appointments with a loved
Yes.
one or their carer or their partner, you know. And you're like, dude, I love you and I want to, you know, let's have some fun, but I don't want to talk about this in front of you. I just don't.
Yeah.
Just like therapy, I guess, you know, it can...
Exactly.
Lush. Oh, I'm going to put some links under this podcast video. If people want to get hold of you, how should they do so, Charlotte?
My email address is charlotte.lawthom2@wales.nhs.uk. I'm also on Twitter at @Lawthom, and I'm a bit of a Twitterholic. So best tweet me there.
And dog-holic, by the way. I know. I've seen the post.
So there's a bit of epilepsy, a lot of dogs, and a bit of rugby. It's like that.
Fab. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. So everybody get ready. We are going to be talking more about the topic of SEX and things that come with it in future episodes.
Thank you so much.